Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 54, where we talk all things fantasy baseball prospecting, but especially prospecting in the ABL, a 30-team Dynasty league with 20 spots per team for minor leaguers for a glorious 600 prospects. And today I want to talk about how to find some prospects this time of year that are not on other people's radar screens, including the industry. And how do you go about doing that? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully it's interesting. I'm going to identify some guys who are free agents in the ABL and one guy who's only owned by one team in all 30 team leagues I'm in. And then one dude I picked up today in one of my 30 teamers. So without further ado, I'll jump right into it. I wanted to talk about some of the criteria that I use to filter prospects at this time of year to try to find players that are not really being talked about in the industry. And what I mean by in the industry is you're not seeing tweets about them. You're not seeing them written up on Baseball America or similar publications. They're not really getting a lot of traction in the industry yet. And this time of year, it's really hard to find those players at A-ball or above. Usually the industry has integrated those players into their analysis by this time of year. So I'm really focusing on the DSL and the complex leagues. And what I'm looking for this time of year are certain metrics, and I put them on this slide here. I'm going to focus on hitters today because I did some pitchers last time, and I've already done some DSL players in the last couple episodes. So I'm going to focus principally on guys in the CPX for this show, at least for the hitters, as I said. So generally speaking, I'm looking for players who are 19 years or younger. If they're playing at the CPX, they need to be 19 or younger. If they're older than that, then they're going to crush the CPX, or they should be. And I'm not really interested in that kind of performance when I'm trying to pluck a prospect who's not on somebody's radar screen. The other things I look for is a minimum of 100 at-bats so that I have at least a reasonable sample size, with the caveat that these are all still probably too small sample size to take to the bank on a prospect. But with that 100 at-bat sample size, what I'm looking for is guys who have a walk rate of 12% or better and a maximum K rate of 25%. So I'm really looking for some plate discipline. It's a good batting eye. And obviously, the lower the strikeout rate, the better it is for me. But that minimum of 12% walk rate is something I look for as a baseline, that they have a decent approach to hitting, and which is a hallmark of potential success down the road. The other thing I would say is that I look at position, I look at frame, things that are in the handbook that I do focus on when evaluating prospects. And so as I filter them out, I go onto a website like MLBtracker.com, and I put in my criteria, which allows you to filter players out. And then I look for the height and weight, age relative to level. The younger they are, and if they're doing well at meeting these criteria, the more interested I become in them. Then I sort the players usually by weighted on base average. You can sort on any stat you want on MLBtracker.com. But I choose that stat because it's a good all-in stat for slugging percentage, creating extra base hits, but also generating walks. It actually weights the value of each kind of performance you can have. So I like to use that one. Other people use weighted RC plus. I don't tend to use that at this time of year too seriously because of the sample size issues. Weighted on base average at this time of year also has some sample size issues. But when you've already put the other criteria in that I've talked about, I like sorting it through weighted on base average, then just basically looking at anybody who has a 450 or above. So let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about some hitters that meet this criteria and why I became interested in them, and maybe you should be too. So the first guy is Juan Martinez. He's a second baseman or a third baseman for the Milwaukee Brewers. He actually is owned in the ABL. He's owned by the ABL Royals, although for those who watch from the ACL, he is a free agent in that league. He's rostered at 6% in Fantrax right now. So not really on a lot of people's radar screens right now, but out of all the guys that I'm going to talk about today, he's got the highest roster percentage. So a few things about him. He repeated the DSL. He's come over stateside at 19. He just turned 19. So 19, 2 months. So he's in the younger side of 19. So good for the level that he's at. He's had more walks and strikeouts every single year of his career. He did that twice in the DSL. And you're more interested in that year one in the DSL rather than year two, where he's really old for the competition in year two. So I look to year one more seriously on a, walk to strikeout ratio. Basically unheralded in the industry. Nobody really knows about this guy. Obviously, some owners know about him at 6%, but still very low ownership percentage. So what is he doing this year, and why am I interested in him? So Martinez is generating a 17.1% walk rate, which is also obviously incredibly encouraging, and he's got a very low 11.6% strikeout rate. That is a elite batting eye that you're seeing so far, albeit in only 164 plate appearances thus far. So we don't over-index on it, but when you take his track record and always walking more than he strikes out, this is very encouraging. It does suggest that this is actually a skill that is going to stick longer term. So I'm interested in that. You can see his incredible slash line that he is generating. 356, 476, 598. Weighted on base average of 485, extremely impressive. And I did put his WRC plus on there at 159. He's crushing basically the CPX right now. 21 stolen bases, which is consistent with what he's done previously. I think as we've talked about on the show a number of times, you can't over-index on minor league stolen bases, particularly because not all the catchers can really throw people out. And a lot of the pitchers don't know how to hold runners on yet. So you often see, particularly at the lower levels, stolen bases being really elevated, and they come down over time. But we're going to see if this is actually a consistent skill, the speed that he has. He certainly has generated stolen bases in other levels. He had 45 steals over 235 plate appearances in 2025. So that may also be a very attractive skill set that he brings. He's a little bit on the shorter side at 6 feet, 150. I suspect that weight is probably underestimating his weight at this point as in his playing days. But at 6 feet, it's not an ideal frame for a hitter. It's really the minimum that I look for in a hitter. And he's probably done growing in terms of height. So that's a little bit of a knock and maybe a drag on his power. So what you're really looking for here in this kid is whether or not he's going to have the on-base skills and the hit tool to allow him to generate a lot of offense with his legs and his speed. So the other thing we're going to see is, when he ultimately gets graded by Baseball America and Baseball HQ, which will probably happen this next year, we'll start to see some scouting grades on him and see whether or not the statistics match the scouting grades, and whether there's a dovetailing there in terms of consensus on him. So he's a guy right now that if you can pick him up in your leagues and you have room on your bench, I think that, walk to strikeout ratio makes him extremely interesting. If he turns out to be a real base stealer, on top of that, we're talking about a potential number 2 hitter, maybe even a leadoff hitter. And the guy who in a points league could generate a lot of points and could be very valuable, particularly if he stays at second base and shortstop, in middle infield. Well, actually, I'm talking about the wrong guy. I skipped past Martinez. Look at that. My apologies. I jumped the gun and I was talking about my next guy on the list. Martinez, he also has 21 stolen bases, but 5'11", 170, so on the shorter side. So I apologize for that. But, again, a guy who has been very impressive. His power has come on a little bit, but is he going to generate enough power? Again, he's a guy so let's go to the next guy who I jumped the gun on, was talking about Jemone Noel, who has a great name. 0% ownership in Fantrax. So he's wide open. He's a free agent in ABL. He's on the Baltimore Orioles, middle infielder, 19 years old, 6 months. Decent age for a level profile. He's 6 feet, 150. As I was saying, minimum height that I want. Could put on some muscle frame, so the power could come on a little bit. He's another guy who has more walks and strikeouts, 25% walk rate, 19.4% strikeout rate. More elevated strikeout rate than we saw with Juan Martinez, but still very attractive, particularly if some power comes on and he adds some muscle. I don't want to over-index on his power upside because of his height, but I do expect a little bit more than he's showing so far. 286, 476, 505, weighted on base average of 471, 145 WRC plus. He also has 21 stolen bases, and he's the one who has 45 in 2025. So real potential, a base stealer, another guy who could end up hitting in the top of a lineup if it continues to all come together for him. So, really attractive potential guy to pick up in, dynasty leagues, particularly 30-teamers or teams that have more than 600 prospects. Particularly if you have a guy that you're not satisfied with this time of year, which is often the case. You want to cut and make room for somebody else. Or if you want to trade a prospect that is on your roster and open up room in your minors, you can add a guy like Noel, and maybe you're getting the same that you just traded away, or maybe you're just taking a slight downgrade, or see if this lottery ticket pans out for you. Adding some power will be key to him and his potential value down the road, and whether or not he can keep that strikeout rate under 20% is another thing that we'll want to keep an eye on. When players start to get to A ball, pitchers start to get a little bit better than in the CPX, and they can expose a player. So I would expect that 25% walk rate to come down. Hopefully it stays around the 12 to 15% range, but 25% is very unrealistic. This is over 144 plate appearance sample size. The strikeout rate, if you can keep it under 20%, that'll play. 12% walk, sub 20% strikeout rate. Those are very good numbers if he is indeed that player. But again, this time of year, there's no harm in adding a dude like this. It's a lottery ticket. Doesn't really cost anything. It'd be $1 ad in most formats. And again, and the guy that I would be keeping an eye on this time of year, because if I wanted to trade somebody, he's a guy I could backfill the roster with. And I like that strategy in Dynasty because sometimes there are guys on the wire who are just as good as guys at the bottom of your minor league system. So that's Noel, really interesting guy who I've been tracking. He's on all of my watch lists, but I haven't added him anywhere just yet, and maybe you will. Last dude on the hitter side is Jemone Brito, who's a Red Sox prospect, making it very surprising to me that he's available in most of my leagues because we have a lot of Red Sox fans in those leagues, and they usually snap up players like this. He's a first base / outfield prospect. It's not quite clear where he's going to play. We do not have a defensive scouting grade on him yet because he's not picked up in Baseball America or Baseball HQ or really anywhere else that I've seen. You won't find him on top 30 lists for the Red Sox. He is a free agent in the ABL, although I just picked him up in one of my 30-team leagues. As you can see here, he only has a 2% roster rate in Fantrax. Another dude who repeated the DSL. It's a common theme here. Solid plate discipline across all levels. 19 years old, 2 months. Again, just turned 19. So age appropriate for the level, if not a little young for the level. You can see a slash line, slightly lower batting average, 278 relative to the prospects we just talked about, but 421 on base percentage, 556 slugging, weighted on base average of 446, 132 WRC plus, all very impressive numbers. Unlike the other two prospects we talked about, this kid, Brito, is actually producing a lot of power right now. He's got a 278 ISO. He's been hitting home runs. You can see on the screen here, 16.4% walk rate, 22.1% strikeout rate, a little bit higher strikeout rate, but a very solid walk rate. He's 6 feet, 175, decent frame. Again, would like to see him be a little bit taller, but those are numbers that will play if he continues to walk at this rate. You can also see he's shown a lot of improvement year over year in his strikeout rates. It's gone from 23% his first year down to 22.1. When he repeated the DSL, it dipped to 20.4%, which is not surprising because he's playing 17 and 16-year-olds when he's 18, or just 17 maturing into 18. But at 22.1% as he's coming stateside, over 140 plate appearances, I'm satisfied right now that he's where he kind of should be, but we're going to want to see how that elevates up or down as he progresses to A-ball. Could get exposed at A-ball similar to these other players, and it could skyrocket up towards 30, and then you become less interested in a guy like Brito. But again, this time of year, for $1 to add him, particularly as a speculative pick, I think he's worth taking a shot at. Free agent in a lot of leagues right now, particularly if he can stay in the outfield where there's less competition for bats relative, or I should put it this way, there's more opportunity for him to actually make a roster in either corner of the outfield rather than at first base, where I've talked about before, a lot of players get funneled to, and therefore it creates more competition, making it harder for a guy to actually get to the majors. One thing we don't know is what his defensive grades are going to be, which will really dictate kind of what his flexibility will be in terms of positions. And we'll probably find out that next year. If he continues to perform like this, it's highly likely that Baseball America will end up grading him, or Baseball HQ at least will grade him. And then we'll get to have some more data points on him and kind of have a better sense in terms of my handbook about where I rank him and where I think about him as a prospect. But, right now, the way I see this kid, he's a potential 7 hitter, maybe better than that, if his power comes on. And so why not add a guy like that? Definitely worth a flyer in my opinion. I added him, like I said, in one league. We'll see how it goes with a guy like Brito. So those are just 3 prospects that I wanted to highlight, 3 hitters that I'm keeping an eye on right now. Not terribly complicated filtering methodology, but it really does help me in my process identifying players that, the industry just isn't even thinking about. I think the common theme is, they really are young for the level. They're really having a decent height. The only exception to that is really, Juan Martinez, who's 5'11", 170, a little bit shorter than I would like to see. But Noel, particularly for, a middle infielder at 6 feet, 150, he's probably actually going to, end up playing at like 175, 180, maybe even more than that. And then, Brito as a corner, 6 feet, 175, I would expect, as he matures into his body, you're going to get a guy who's like 6 feet, 190, 195, something like that. Could end up packing on a lot of power. Interesting profile, again, particularly if you can keep the strikeout rate under control. But at this time of year, at a 2% roster rate, he's basically available everywhere. And if you want to add him, go for it. So those are the hitters I wanted to cover. I also wanted to talk a little bit about, what I call, the 25 Club. And this is a group of pitchers who have a 25% or more K- walk ratio. And this is the leading metric I use at this time of year, and really all through the year is K- walk ratio for pitchers. I've talked about that and why I do that, in prior episodes, but, in short, it is the best metric for future success in terms of being able to command the strikeout and generate points in fantasy leagues by getting strikeouts and avoiding walks. Strikeouts, of course, also make it difficult to get hits. So that, it's always good for a pitcher. But the criteria I used here just to generate this group of 4 guys is I looked at pitchers that have had 100 batters or more faced, which eliminates a lot of guys who just debuted in the DSL, for example, or just come back from injury. I'm looking for dudes who are young for their level. So I eliminated, for example, 23-year-olds in A-ball or something like that. I also took out K-Da Anderson, Seth Hernandez, and Ryan Sloan. All of them are having great seasons, but everybody knows about those players. I wanted to focus on guys who maybe are a little less heralded or just coming into their own, popping up in places. But what the filtering really does is it enables you to isolate really kind of players, again, who are maybe diamonds in the rough, underappreciated in fantasy circles. All of these guys on the list have gotten publicity to one degree or another. They're a little bit differently situated, therefore, than the hitters we just talked about. But let's talk about each one of them and kind of what stands out to me. Christian Zazuta is a Dodgers prospect who just got promoted to AA. Most of his numbers this year have been in high A ball, which are slightly less impressive given he's 21 years old. But I'm really looking to see how he's going to perform at AA now that he's gotten promoted, because he's going to be young for that level. And if he ends up racking up the same kind of numbers, then I'm really interested in him. And if he struggles right now, just having been promoted, it may be a real opportunity for you if you're interested in getting a high upside pitcher to pounce and buy low on him, and then get him on the bounce back when he kind of gets his feet under him in AA ball. 6'4", 163, really strong frame. I suspect that weight is really kind of low, and he's actually heavier than that at this point. Obviously, there's room to pack on some muscle, which is good for a pitcher and his durability. Also, usually it lets him add a little bit of velocity. What really stands out right now for him is he's got an incredible walk to strikeout ratio of 30.8%. Again, mostly at high A ball, but the sub 6% walk rate really does stand out. So I'm very eager to see how he performs as he gets his feet under him in AA ball. If this continues to show up in the stat line, I'll be really excited about him. But I think the industry is going to be super excited about him too as a result. He's got a little bit of a tax because he's a Dodger pitcher. That could go both ways. Some people like are kind of down on the Dodger prospecting system because a lot of them haven't panned out at the major league level. Hello, Alex Freeland. But Zazzuda is a guy I'm really interested in. The ABL Braves have him in our league, but definitely we're a guy worth keeping your eye on. I think he has potentially really bright future. So let's talk about the next guy on the slide, Johnny Slawinski, who the ABL Yankees have. He's a guy who's 19 years old. He's at the CPX. So he's the youngest guy on this list relative to, Kayama, which we're going to get to, is the same age, but relative to the other two. Age appropriate for the CPX, 6'3", 180. Again, solid frame. Expect there'll be some muscle weight added on there to help with his velocity and his durability. But 29.3 K minus walk, extremely impressive. 5.2% walk rate. Love to see that. Anytime you're getting under 6, we're talking about like really elite numbers for a pitcher. You like to see that command early on in a pitcher's career because it's going to get an organization a lot of confidence to promote them and therefore potentially bring them up to the majors sooner. This guy probably has a really high up arrow on him, and I think the industry is going to be really on him very, very soon. He's already getting buzz. But I think it's going to grow louder and louder, particularly if he gets advanced up to A ball and puts up these kind of numbers or anything close to them. A really exciting prospect. He is in the Angels organization, and they have kind of a demerit against them in terms of player development over the years. So it'll be interesting to see how he progresses. Will they be able to unlock his potential? I'm sure some owners would have some hesitancy buying into an Angels pitcher or Angels prospect in general, but the numbers certainly get you excited. I don't think he was on a lot of people's radar screens coming into the year, but he's certainly getting on radar screens now. The next guy on the list is a little bit different story. He's Ramon Marquez. He's a Phillies prospect, 20 years old at high A ball. Age appropriate, but the oldest guy relative, other than Christian Zuzetta, on this list. He's at A ball, perfectly fine. 28.3 walk by K minus walk ratio. Again, mostly at A ball. He's at high A ball, I should say now. So mostly at A ball. He's now at high A ball. 9.9% walk rate. More elevated than you'd like to see. Candidly, like if it's over 8%, I start to get worried, particularly at the lower levels, with these pitchers. But that strikeout rate is really high, which leads to the 28.3 K minus walk ratio. So you stay interested in him. 6'2", 182, solid frame for a pitcher. We'll see how he progresses at high A ball. That's going to be a challenge for him, particularly if he continues to walk players, because the hitters at high A are more advanced. So we'll see how he progresses. But certainly a guy the ABL Royals are excited to have rostered. We'll see how his career, tracks. And the last guy on this slide is Argenis Kayama, who is one of my prospects in ABL for the Orioles, but he's San Francisco Giants prospect. He's an interesting story. He's on the IL right now with an undisclosed injury. My understanding is he's just coming back and he's starting to do rehab. So hopefully it wasn't too serious of an injury. But he's a guy I picked up last year in ABL. He kind of was a pop-up prospect last season. He's 6 feet, 200 pounds. That's the minimum height that I want for a pitcher, is 6 feet. So candidly, he's a little short for my liking. But at 204 pounds, I mean, this guy's he's very sturdily built. He's starting to really show command. His walk rate has dropped by 50% almost year over year. He was at 10.3% in 2025, which is really scary. And he's been at 5.5% this year, which is incredible. It's an incredible difference. We have a question from the audience. What is it? Shirts off, waving it over my head. There you go. 25.5% K minus walk ratio, the lowest out of this grouping. But over that 25% threshold, I want to see. Really like the 5.5% walk rate. Kayama is a guy who's the youngest guy for the level on this list. He's 19 years old at A ball, which is something that's really impressive and makes the 5.5% walk rate even more impressive, and the cut down of the walk rate from 10.3 to 5.5 more impressive. And he's holding his own in terms of his strikeout to walk ratio. This is a guy who has the potential to be a 3-4 in a rotation, or a really effective relief pitcher, given his height down the road. So there are a lot of paths to the majors from a prospecting standpoint. The bullpen risk is a little bit scary, but if he can stay in the rotation, he's a guy who could provide a lot of value down the road. He's injured right now, so he might be a guy you'd be able to trade for in some leagues. And if I had to rank these guys in kind of order of interest, I put that at the bottom of the screen. Slawinski, I have number 1, principally because of the incredible walk to strikeout ratio, age for level, and frame at 6'3", 180. Kind of the most interesting to me because he's so young and already is performing at a high level. And then Zazueta, I have number 2 on the list, mostly because of the frame and the 30% strikeout minus walk ratio, which is the highest on the sheet. But again, for him, I really want to see how he does at AA ball. And if he's able to deliver that at 21 years old at AA, then I'm really buying into this kid. I have 0 shares of him, which is disappointing, but he's a guy I'm interested. I have shares of Kayama and Slawinski. Kayama would be next. He would actually be elevated even higher for me because of his age versus level, but for the fact that he's 6 feet, and that's a height that just scares me with starting pitchers. I really prefer them to be 6'2" or more. 6'1's like livable, but 6 feet gets me a little scary of injury risk, bullpen risk, because those pitchers tend not to be as durable. There are always exceptions to the rule. There have been pitchers who have been 6 feet and been wildly successful. But again, exception to the rule. When you're taking bets or hedging bets on prospect development, I use frame as one barometer, to keep myself grounded. And Ramon Marquez, who's on this list with a great strikeout rate, netting a 28.3 strikeout minus walk rate. It's really the walk rate that scares me. It puts it at the bottom of the list for me. Again, he's at high A now. We'll see how he does. Most of his numbers were put up at A ball. So, work in progress, but certainly a guy who's worth rostering if you don't have him. And the Royals can be happy in ABL having rostered him. So the last thing I wanted to talk about today is just some recent promotions. This is a slide that I had up in the last episode. And, the title of the slide was, "Are they ready for the next level?" And it turns out the Dodgers thought Chase Harlan was ready for the next level. They have promoted him to high A ball, which is exciting to see. And I think, one of the things I was talking about last episode about Harlan, who's one of my prospects in the ABL, is he's really come on with his power this year. And so the question has always been about his hit tool. I think Baseball America gave him a 40 hit tool coming into the season, and he's been really dominating. These are his numbers as of last week, or the last episode, I should say. He, really, and I talked about how his hit tool had been really coming on. He's now been promoted to high A, and he's gotten off to a blazing start at high A. He's hit a couple home runs already, putting up big numbers. It's obviously an incredibly small sample size, so we're not going to get too overworked about that. But very excited to see how Harlan does as he's now at high A, 19 years old, certainly age appropriate. He's almost 20. So I'm really happy to see him get up to high A. The other guy who just got promoted was Alfredo Dano. So he's gone from high A to double A, which is exactly where you want to see him at 20 years old. Very impressive that he's up there. He's also gotten off to a decent start, hitting some home runs at double A. We'll see how his hit tool carries at double A ball. He's going to be challenged by some advanced pitching. And probably the third best catcher prospect, if not the second best catcher prospect right now in baseball. And so very excited to see him get advanced up to double A ball. We have still not seen Christian Argenis, who's on this slide, get promoted. I suspect that's a little bit less likely that he'll get promoted until maybe at the end of the year, or until the CPX league winds down, or if he gets promoted at all this year. But still tearing up the CPX, still putting up the kind of video arcade numbers that you want to see. But I thought it was just interesting that two of those guys get promoted right after I did the show. So good for them. We'll see how they do. That'll be exciting to see as we go forward. So that's the show for today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the next episode, which is going to be very happily joined by Cal and Tyler, the former hosts of The Big Show for ABL. And we're going to be doing a minor league all-star team for the ABL. And we'll be talking about some, crushes and fades. And we'll talk a little bit about who would you take over Rainiel Rodriguez at this point in the minor leagues. And then Cal and Tyler have promised to do a little bit on who they think is going to go to the ABL World Series, which I'll chime in on. So we'll have a little bit of the big league, discussion going on this podcast for the first time, which I'm looking forward to. But I thought it'd be fun during the All-Star break to check in with those guys since they're not doing the show this year. But in any event, thanks for watching, and look forward to seeing you next time. And I'll leave you with my salutation. Take it easy.
Remember to ABP, always be prospecting.